a lot of women out here that's just, they just deficient in so many things, man. Missing so many key nutrients in your life. I just want you to stay healthy in these streets. Somebody got to give you some vitamin D. Yeah. Luda.
Vitamin D. What is it? How do we get it? What does it do for us? You likely have some answers in mind to these questions. Perhaps you know it as the sunshine vitamin, which we absorb when we are in the sun. It's known around the world that way, as you can see. Maybe you've heard that it's not found much in food, which is why we fortify our milk and cereal with it. Or perhaps you are thinking, yeah, vitamin D, that's that cheeky song that Ludacris put out last year. In this presentation, we are going to set the record straight about vitamin D, what it is, where it's found in nature, the role it plays in our bodies, how much you need if you are a child, man, or woman, what happens if you become D deficient or D toxic, and a few more facts about vitamin D that you may be surprised to learn. The discovery of vitamins is a chapter of modern history that begins at the turn of the 20th century, scarcely more than 100 years ago. It came about gradually through the efforts of a number of scientists working independently in Europe and the States, and an understanding gradually developed that debilitating and disfiguring diseases such as beriberi, rickets, and scurvy were not caused by toxins or germs, but rather by dietary deficiencies, and thus could be alleviated through dietary change. This realization represented a revolution in nutritional knowledge. At the time, the accepted wisdom was that a well-rounded diet consisted of fats, proteins, carbohydrates, salt, and water alone. Many in the late 19th century subscribed to the guidelines set by a group of German chemists at that time. They determined that a healthy diet consisted of 12% protein, 5% salt minerals, 10 to 30% fat, and the remainder carbohydrates. But the experiments showed this was insufficient. Something more was needed for health. But that something was elusive. The discovery of vitamins, at first called accessory food factors, came about in an effort to counteract scourges such as beriberi, rickets, scurvy, and pellagra. It is for this reason that the first identified vitamins were initially called the anti-beriberi, the anti-rachitic, and the anti-scorbutic. And it is this reason that these diseases have not been eradicated today. Improper diet still can and does lead to them. The birth of the vitamin. The British Royal Society of Chemistry reports that in 1912, Casimir Funk, a Polish biochemist then working in Switzerland, announced he had identified 3 substances that, when taken from the diet, would cause abnormal metabolism and disease. He believed that these substances must be all from the family of amines. He was mistaken, they tell us, but this is why he collectively called them vital amines, a name he then shortened to vitamins. However, Funk himself, in the 1922 second edition of his work, The Vitamins, claims he fashioned the name by design, not by mistake. "I must admit," he wrote, "that when I chose the name vitamine, I was well aware that these substances might later prove not to be of an amine nature. However, it was necessary for me to choose a name that would sound well and serve as a catchword, since I had already at that time no doubt about the importance and the future popularity of the new field. Despite the fact that a number of ideas originated by us are credited to others, it is a source of pleasure to witness the great progress that has been made in vitamin research. In our opinion, the name vitamine, proposed by us in 1912, contributed in no small measure to the dissemination of these ideas. Our view as to the fortunate choice of this name is strengthened because it has become popular, and a badly chosen catchword, like a folk song without feeling, can never become popular. So what is this crucial class of nutrients called vitamins, and what roles do vitamins play in our bodies? To distinguish this unusual group, with relatively few chemical or functional similarities between them, we turn to the list of common characteristics of vitamins put forth in Combs and McClung's 2017 fifth edition of The Vitamins: Fundamental Aspects in Nutrition and Health. Vitamins are organic compounds, but distinct from other organic compounds, namely the fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. They are substances which our bodies cannot synthesize in amounts adequate to meet normal needs. Vitamins are a natural component of foods, usually present in them in only minute amounts. Vitamins are essential for the normal physiological functioning of the body. Each one prevents a specific deficiency syndrome, which occurs if the vitamin is absent in the body or underutilized by it. You will notice on this concept map that there are two words in red. Vitamins are usually found in food. Most vitamins must be obtained through our diet. Vitamin D is the cause of these two qualifying words. We'll explain vitamin D's unusual characteristics in a moment, but first we should address a question you may already be asking yourself. In general, essential nutrients have most of these qualities we have just named. They are organic, natural components of foods which our bodies need for normal physiological functioning, but either cannot synthesize or do not do so in sufficient amounts. What makes vitamins different from other nutrients? It must be the specific deficiency syndromes that result from their absence. That, as we have said, is how vitamins were first identified, in an effort to understand and cure their deficiency-related diseases. The many roles vitamins play in our bodies are still being discovered, and this can sometimes cause confusion and controversy, as we will see particularly in the case of vitamin D, which we turn to now. While cod liver oil has been a home remedy in Norway for centuries, by the early 1900s, marketers had improved its taste through emulsion and begun to market it worldwide. With the discovery of vitamins A and D, or more precisely, the discovery that cod liver oil contains substances effective against rickets, its popularity took off in the 1920s, and the man with the fish on his back, the trademark of Scott's emulsion, became ubiquitous around the globe. The product's popularity grew by piggybacking on and promoting the results of independent research conducted by a number of scientists, most importantly among them Englishman Sir Edward Mellanby and American Elmer McCollum. In Great Britain, Mellanby experimented with dogs, feeding them oatmeal, the dietary staple of then ricket-stricken Scotlanders. When the dogs developed rickets, he attempted to treat it with cod liver oil, in line with the findings of McCollum and Marguerite Davis in 1913 that butterfat and cod liver oil contained factors that supported growth and helped prevent certain eye diseases in mice. Mellanby found that cod liver oil cured the dog's rickets, attributing it to vitamin A, which recently had been isolated in the oil and named by McCollum. In 1922, McCollum took Mellanby's line of inquiry one step further, destroying the vitamin A in cod liver oil and then feeding this altered oil to diseased mice. Now, the oil no longer prevented eye disease, but it continued to cure rickets. With two more vitamins having been isolated in the meantime, McCollum named this substance the fourth vitamin, vitamin D, according to the utilitarian naming system he had devised with colleagues, and he published his findings in the 1922 article you see here. Contemporaneously, in Germany, Kurt Holschinski, a pediatrician who had served the German army as a field medic during the war, had returned to his research and in 1919 demonstrated that both sunlight and manufactured UV light also had curative powers against rickets. It is these early discoveries of McCollum, Mellanby, and Holschinski that are the foundation of our knowledge about vitamin D today. So what is vitamin D and why does it prompt us to add exceptions to the rules about vitamin characteristics? Like vitamin A, vitamin D is a hormone, but vitamin D does not enter the body as an active compound. It goes through 2 hydroxylations in the body before it is activated. Hydroxylation, as the name implies, is the addition of a hydroxyl group, oxygen and hydrogen, to an organic compound. This is an extremely important process for D because as a fat soluble, it needs to be converted into a hydrophilic form, the same way lipids do. Hydroxylation accomplishes this, converting D into 25-hydroxyvitamin D, also called calcidiol. This is the first hydroxylation. It takes place in the liver. Then, in the kidneys, calcidiol is transformed into D's physiologically active form, calcitriol, or 1.25-dihydroxyvitamin D. The active form of vitamin D is produced from sterols in the body through photolysis or photodecomposition, a chemical reaction in which a chemical compound is broken down by photons. Photolysis takes place when the skin is exposed to ultraviolet light. However, not everyone receives adequate sun exposure to manufacture sufficient vitamin D for their body's needs. Weight, style of dress, skin pigmentation, sunblock usage, environmental conditions, season, latitude, and time of day all affect photolysis on the skin. However, many people do receive adequate D from sun exposure alone. This is why D is called the sunshine vitamin. Unlike the other vitamins, it does not necessarily need to be orally ingested. For this reason, an argument can be made that D cannot be considered a vitamin at all, but more properly a prohormone synthesized at the cutaneous level. Nevertheless, it is also ingested in foods in the process I described earlier, so both these sources of intake must be taken into consideration. Nutritional biochemist Hector De Luca, who first identified the active forms of vitamin D in the body, explains, by following the reasoning that vitamin D is not required in the diet under conditions of adequate ultraviolet irradiation of skin, and that it is the precursor of a hormone, it is likely that the vitamin is not truly a vitamin, but must be regarded as a prohormone. These arguments, however, are only semantic. The fact remains that vitamin D is taken in the diet and is an extremely potent substance which prevents a deficiency disease. And, as we have said, this is an important characteristic uniting the vitamin group. Vitamin D, as the early rickets experiments proved, plays an important role in the maintenance of healthy bones. It is on this basis, skeletal system needs, that the Food and Nutrition Board of the Institute of Medicine set its definitions of adequate intake for vitamin D, revised in 2010. The recommendations are for 10 micrograms daily in the first year of life, and 15 micrograms a day after that until the age of 71, when intake should increase to 20 micrograms a day. Tolerable upper intake levels have been set at 25 micrograms a day for the first half year of life, 38 for the second half year, 63 for toddlers, 75 daily for young children, and 100 micrograms a day from the age of 9 onward. The RDA and AI numbers you see on the left are designed to be references for individuals to follow. They take into account adequate nutrition intake as well as levels of micronutrient needed for disease prevention. The AI values are established only when evidence is insufficient to generate an RDA. EAR values, or estimated average requirements, which you see in the middle table, reflect the median of the distribution of human requirements. The EAR are designed to be used as standards by researchers and nutrition policymakers. Both the RDA and EAR values for vitamin D assume minimal to no sun exposure. Thus, some researchers have suggested that as dietary guidelines, they may overshoot the mark for a not insignificant portion of the population. The 2010 revised numbers have also come under fire from Robert Herney and Michael Holick, the authors of the pre-revision numbers used by the IOM, calculated in 1997. In the Journal of Bone and Mineral Research, the authors have criticized the revised values for failing to take into account a growing body of research that suggests that vitamin D is important for far more than just healthy bones. The IOM stance in 2010 was that in order to warrant recommending higher intake, further validation was needed of this research. In the third edition of the voluminous compendium dedicated to vitamin D research, published in 2011, the editors responded directly to the IOM's seeming slight with the following rebuttal. As the authors in sections 4 on targets, 9 on analogs, 10 on cancer, 11 on immunity, inflammation, and disease, and 12 on therapeutic applications and new advances, remind us over and over again, definitive randomized clinical trial data supporting a role for vitamin D in the pathophysiology and/or treatment of non-skeletal human diseases are still wanting. However, as covered in essentially every chapter in this book, data highly suggestive of benefit in a multitude of diseases are so strong that many vitamin D researchers are persuaded that vitamin D will eventually be convincingly demonstrated to be efficacious in many disease states. Furthermore, many authors express the viewpoint that avoidance of vitamin D deficiency will be shown to prevent, delay, or reduce the development of numerous diseases. A look at the titles of papers presented over 4 days last month at the annual International Congress on Vitamin D gives an idea of the breadth of research involving vitamin D in the body. While researchers continue to investigate vitamin D's role in preventing and fighting bone disease, now its connections with cancer, respiratory disease, and reproduction are also being studied. Some 50 genes have already been identified as being regulated by vitamin D. The discovery of vitamin D receptors throughout the body, the red dots you see here, has given much encouragement to widening the scope of research into vitamin D's effects in the body. A vitamin D receptor gene, called the VDR gene for short, provides instructions for making a protein which is also called VDR. Once D is activated into its calcitriol form, a VDR protein binds to it. This complex eventually binds to particular regions of DNA chains, regulating the activity of vitamin D responsive genes. Turning these genes on or off, the VDR complex not only helps control calcium and phosphate absorption into the bloodstream from the intestines, it also works to balance a number of other minerals in the body. While research into vitamin D's roles in the body is expanding in many directions, it is relatively simpler to discuss the known D deficiency syndrome. And this is osteomalacia. We began this presentation with a mention of rickets. Rickets is a form of osteomalacia, bad bones, which occurs primarily in young children. Unlike with osteoporosis, in which bone resorption far outweighs ossification, and existing bone becomes porous and weak. Bone continues to form in people afflicted with osteomalacia. However, it does not mineralize, leading to its softness. Nutritional rickets is the most common form of rickets. It presents itself in the first 2 years of life most often and is caused by inadequate intake of vitamin D, calcium, and/or phosphorus. But vitamin D is what helps the bones to absorb calcium and phosphorus. Without these, the bones cannot harden. This is why the legs grow bent. They cannot support the weight of the growing body they carry. Other visible symptoms of rickets are thickened wrists and ankles and beaded ribs. It can also affect the hardening of the teeth and lead to a delay in the suturing of fontanelles in the youthful skull and the hardening of the epiphyseal plate in long bones. Instead, this cartilaginous area at the end of bones continues to widen, causing the bone ends to become visibly enlarged and abnormally long. Osteomalacia can occur in adults too, but its effects are more severe in children whose bones are growing. In adults, osteomalacia symptoms can range from muscular weakness to pain in the spine, shoulder, ribs, or pelvis. Bone manufacture continues by osteoblasts, but the matrix they lay is not well mineralized. Vitamin D deficiency is generally considered to be measured as having a calcidiol level that is less than 20 nanograms per milliliter. On the extreme other end of the scale is vitamin toxicity. Tolerable upper intake levels for vitamin D are 25 micrograms a day for infants in the first 6 months of life and 38 micrograms a day in the second 6 months, 63 micrograms a day for toddlers, and 75 micrograms a day for children aged 4 to 8. Older children and adults should not exceed 100 micrograms of vitamin D a day. Cases of vitamin D toxicity due to natural intake are rare today. The amounts of D occurring in foods, even fortified foods, are minuscule. In the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, however, this was not always the case. In these decades in the US and Europe, as knowledge about vitamins began to grow, food fortification began, not by governments, but by food producers. Hemo, for example, promised a banquet of vitamins and minerals in each glass, and Schlitz encouraged people to chug their way to health. In these years, a wide variety of food products were fortified with vitamins, and their added benefits were touted as marketing tools, but with encouragement from and support of the scientific community. For most people, fortified food consumption did not lead to vitamin D toxicity, but there were cases, enough that governments were prompted to begin to regulate food fortification from the 1950s. Excessive exposure to the sun cannot cause deintoxication because excess prohormone is destroyed by UV radiation on the skin. Hypervitaminosis D today is usually due to excessive supplement consumption. It is characterized by hypercalcemia, an excess of calcium in the blood. Vitamin D intoxication can cause diarrhea, drowsiness, headaches, gastrointestinal distress, nervousness, and vomiting. Prolonged hypercalcemia can lead to calcinosis, in which calcium and phosphorus get deposited into soft tissues like the heart and kidneys. The greatest at-risk population for hypovitaminosis D is the elderly, who often take D supplements to fight decreasing bone density and who may receive high doses of D as intramuscular injections. This brings us to an important point. What are the natural sources of vitamin D? We have spoken about sun exposure. One of the reasons that vitamin D is nicknamed the sunshine vitamin is that it is not abundant in many foods. According to nutrient calculations of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which you see here, a serving of salmon or trout or a cup of mushrooms will satisfy adults' daily requirements for vitamin D intake. But otherwise, as these values show, it may be challenging to reach the recommended daily intake of 15 micrograms for adults 70 and under, unless one turns to cod liver oil. However, these numbers do not tell the whole story. It is important to note that vitamin D content in foods such as these can vary widely. The USDA numbers are averages. A new study by researchers at the USDA, the National Institutes of Health, and Virginia Tech, published this year in the 4th edition of Researches on Vitamin D, reminds us that vitamin D added to the feed of farmed fish, chicken, cows, pigs, and lambs raised for the food industry can significantly influence the levels of vitamin D in our consumed fish, eggs, meat, and dairy products. In their study, they found, for example, that vitamin D levels in eggs ranged from 1.4 to 10.4 micrograms per 100 grams. That's about 2 large eggs, with 3.3 micrograms being the mean. And this is somewhat more than USDA figures report. Fortified milk was found to range from 0 to 11.0 micrograms per 100 grams. In fact, of the meats, animal products, seafood, fortified baby foods, fortified dairy, and other foods tested, only fortified margarine showed no vitamin D, but no variation in D levels across their samples. Well, this does not mean that USDA levels should be disregarded. It does remind us to use them as indicators and to read labels. and to choose food widely, and to go in the sun. I hope this presentation has enlightened you generally about the history of vitamin discovery, the importance of vitamin D in the body, how to get it and how much you need, as well as the dangers of D deficiency and detoxicity. Of course, there is much more to be said. Rolling by, you see the sources consulted to make this presentation. Feel free to dive into them and also to do your own research. Vitamin D is important and pretty cool.